Now let's go over question number 482, license key formatting. You are given a license key represented as a string S that consists of alphanumeric characters and dashes. So we're going to be given a string S that's going to be a license key, and it has alphabets and numbers and dashes. So three things. The string is separated into n+1 groups by n dashes. You are also given an integer k. So we know that whatever our string is, it's separated by n+1 groups and it has n dashes. We want to reformat string S such that each group contains exactly k characters. So the integer that we're given, we want to make our license key such that each group has k number of alphanumeric characters, except for the first one. So this is going to be an important thing, which could be shorter than k, but still must contain at least one character. Furthermore, there must be a dash inserted between two groups, and you should convert all lowercase into uppercase. So we want all of our letters into uppercase, and we're going to have k number of characters for each group, and between each group there must be a dash. So there's three things that we have to consider. First one is k number of characters per group. Second is there must be a dash between two groups. So group dash group. And last one, it has to be all uppercase. All right, let's look at some examples. So for the first example, we are given this string and our k is 4. That means that we want 4 characters per group. And our output is this. Now for this one, it happened to be the case that the first group had the 4 characters, but that always might not be the case. For example, if you were to look at example 2, we had a k of 2, and you can see that the first one has only 1 character. So let's see how the first one worked. Well, we can solve this or see how this one worked is by just iterating our string from the back. So what we'll do is, starting from the back of the string, we will keep making our groups of k characters. So that'll be something like W, 9, E, and then 2. So this is one group, right? It has 4 characters. Now we want to satisfy our second condition, which states that we have to have a dash between two groups. And then we just bring rest of the characters, which is going to be Z, 3, F, and 5. And here you can see that we have our result. And remember that we want all of our letters in uppercase. Now let's go to our example 2. Well, example 2 has a k of 2, right? So 2 characters per group. So same as before, let's iterate starting from the back and keep making our groups. So that's going to be J, 3. So we have our group 1 and we want our dash. So our second condition. And then it's G and 5. And we want it to be capital, and we made our second group, and now it's going to be the last one, which is going to be the number 2. And remember that there was an exception where first group doesn't have to have our k number of characters per group. So this will be our exception. It happened to be the just case that our first example just had 4 characters, but if we were to have more, it would have something like a dash here, and then how many characters that we would have from our given string. So try to implement this using the same logic, and if you're stuck, just come back later. If you guys find this helpful, make sure you guys like and subscribe. Thanks. Now let's implement our first solution. Our first solution is going to have a time complexity of O of n squared and space of O of n. Well, it's going to be really slow, but I think this illustrates the problem really well. So let's implement this. Now, first thing I want is I want my output variable. This is where we are going to store our result. And later, let's return our result over here. And now I want to first get rid of all the dashes in my string and store that to a variable. So that's going to be called a string. And how can we remove all the instances of our dash? Well, we can remove it by using replace method. So it'll be string or s.replace, and we need to pass in a regular expression. So it'll be something like this, and we are going to replace it with an empty string. Now, if you were to console log our new string, you can see that all the instances of dashes are removed. Now, what this does is, this is our regular expression, is getting rid of all the dashes globally. Now, if I didn't have this G, it would only remove the first instance of my dash, which is only this one. But we want all the dashes to be removed because you want to iterate through our string without the dashes. Now, given that, let's create our for loop to iterate through our new string. And remember that we want to iterate starting from the back. Let's create our for loop. I is going to be string.length -1, and we want to iterate until I is greater than -1. We have to be now able to make our groups. So remember that each group is going to have k number of characters. Now, to track how many elements that we added, because remember, if we finish one group, we have to be able to push in a dash. So I'm going to create a variable, a counter variable, to check how many elements are in our output so far. So if we have k number of elements, I want to be able to push in a dash. So for this example, if I finish adding 4 characters, I want to add in a dash and then put the rest of the characters and then put in another dash if it has more than 4 elements. Now let's create our counter variable over here. That's going to be equal to 0. And as long as my count is not equal to k, I can add elements to our output, right? So that's going to be if my count is less than my k. What I can do is I can add my element to my output. But what I'm going to do is I wanted to put it in the front of our array. So that's going to be output.unshift, and we're going to pass in our current character. That's going to be string at index I, and you can see that we have our characters. So the reason why I use unshift is because, well, I'm iterating through starting from the back, but if I just push it at the end, my license would be backwards, right? It would start from W9E2Z3F5. But I want the opposite. I want to keep the order. And there is one thing that you have to do also. Well, we have to convert all of our characters into an uppercase. So let's do that over here. So let's convert it to uppercase, and we're supposed to do it where the string is. So here, to uppercase, and you can see that all the characters are now uppercase. So it's looking good. Now we just have to be able to push in a dash into a correct place. So after we added, we want to increase our count by 1 because we added an element. Now we have to do another check. Well, we have to somehow reset 0 so that we can push more elements in and push in a dash after 4. So right now it's only adding 4 characters because when count is greater than k or equal to k, it's not adding more elements. So now let's try to handle that. So if count is equal to k, what do you want to do? Well, you want to first reset our count variable to 0, and you want to add a dash. So that's going to be output.unshift. We add a dash, and you can see that we have our dash over here. But we have a problem. We have a dash in front of our license key, and this is something that we don't want, right? Because, well, remember that the first group has to at least have 1 character. Right now, it's having 0 characters. So how can you solve this edge case? Well, we can just change our if statement a little bit. So if k is equal to count and I does not equal to 0, we want to push in or unshift a dash and set our count to 0. And as you can see over here, it's looking good. Now finally, we just have to do one thing, and we just have to join this so that it's a string, not an array. And to do that, let's use a join method. And here you can see that we have our final result. So let's uncomment this. And for this one, it's also looking good. So starting from the back, it only has 2 characters per group. So 2, 2, and 1. Now let's go over our solution just one more time. First thing we did was we created a variable named output so that we can add our letters, characters, numbers, and dashes here. And next, we got rid of all the instance of our dash using replace. And we declared a variable named count so that we can count how many elements added so far. So this count variable is helping us keep track of how many characters are in the current group. Now we iterate starting from the last character, and as long as the count is less than k, that means that our group is not finished. We are using unshift to add that character into our output. So we're putting in the front of our array, and while we're doing that, we are changing our character into uppercase, and we increment our count every time we add an element. Now we check, Well, is our count equal to our k? Because we can only have k number of elements per group. And does I not equal to 0? Well, we saw that if we don't have this condition, it's going to have a dash over here in the front. So that's our edge case. We want to handle that. So if this evaluate is true, we want to add in a dash and then reset our count to 0 so that we can keep adding more elements. And when we're done looping through our whole string, we finally want to return our output, which is an array, but we want to convert that into a string using join. And finally, we get our result. Now let's implement our second solution, and our second solution is going to have a time and space of O of n. And for this one, it's going to actually have almost the exact the same logic, but we're going to use a bunch of method chained together to solve this problem. So first, let's get our string without all the dashes. So return as, and I'm going to use replace method, same as before, to get rid of all the instance of my dash. Pass in dash, we want to remove it globally, and we want to replace it with an empty string. And here you can see that we have our string or license key without dashes. Now I want to convert this into a variable so that I can iterate through it. So we're going to use split, and this is going to split all the characters into an array. Now what I want to do is I want to use reduce write. So reduce, pass in our accumulator, current value, and our index. And what reduce write does is it iterates starting from the back of the array. And we're going to pass in our accumulator, which is going to be an empty array. And you can actually call this output if you like. It's totally same thing. I'll just leave it as accumulator, but just think of it this array as our output variable that we had before. Now we need our checks. So our if statements are going to be the same thing. One key difference that we're going to have is we're actually not going to use unshift. That's why our time complexity is better for this one. But instead, I'm going to reverse it later. So let's first add in our characters. But before we have our checks, remember that we need our count variable to check how many elements that we added so far. So let's have that up there. So if our count is less than our k, what do you want to do? We want to push in the character into our accumulator. So let's do that. Accumulator push our current value. And remember that we want to change this into an uppercase. We're getting errors because we haven't returned anything. Let's return our accumulator to get rid of that error. And you can see that we have all the characters in our array. But remember that since we didn't use unshift, the order is backwards. But we're going to handle that later. So now let's continue. We want to increment our count by 1 each time we add. So let's have that. Right now, it's only giving me the first group because, well, we need to somehow handle our case when we finish a group of k characters, right? So we need our another if statement. So if k is equal to our count, what do you want to do? Well, we want to reset our count variable and add in a dash. So count is equal to 0, and let's add in a dash. So push, we want to push in a dash. So that looks good. And remember that we have to somehow take care of the edge case where we want to get rid of the first dash, right? So we need our another check. So that's and I does not equal 0. So it looks good. It's just that our array is backwards. And you can actually shorten this a little, get rid of this, and just add a comma over here. Get rid of that line. And then you can just get rid of this line. So that looks better. Okay, now we have our array. We just need to reverse this and then convert this into a string. So to do that, let's just use reverse. And you can see that our array was reversed. Now we just have to convert this into a string. So how do we do that? Well, we do that by using join. And as you can see, we have our result. And let's uncomment this. And you can see that our second one is looking good too. So let's go over our code one more time. So we created a variable named count. And again, that's going to keep count of number of characters per group. Now we use replace to get rid of all the dashes in our string. And we use split to make our string into an array so that we can iterate it later. And we use reduce write. And remember that reduce write is literally like a for loop backwards. So we're looping through each character in our array and we check, well, is the count less than 0? If it is, we add it to our accumulator and then increment our count by 1. Next, we check, well, is the count equal to our given integer k? If it is, we want to create a new group, right? So we add in a dash and we set our count to 0. But remember that there is a edge case where we don't want a dash in front of the array with no elements next to it. So I does not equal to 0 handles that case. Finally, we want to reverse our array so that it's in order, join it so that we get a string, not an array, and we get our result. Now let's implement our last solution. And our last solution is going to have a pair space complexity of 1 because we are going to use a in place method. Now, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of all my dashes and convert my string into an array. So same as before, but this time we are just going to override it. So s is going to equal to s.replace, and we replace all instance of our dash with a empty string. And we want to split this so that we can get an array. Now, same as before, let's iterate starting from the back. But this time it's going to be a little different. So for this one, what I'm going to do is same as before, I'm going to iterate starting from the back, but the difference is that I'm going to add a dash to a character where it's appropriate. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, we know that for the first example, we need a dash after we created a group of 4 characters. So that's over here, right? But instead of somehow pushing in a dash, I'm going to add the dash to this character. So this character will change to zi or z dash. So I don't have to change my array. I can just simply add a dash to this character. So that will be a lot less work, right? So let's create our for loop for let I is equal to, and it's going to be s.length minus 1. And we have to subtract one more thing, and that's k, because we want to add in every k element, and we want to iterate as long as I is greater than -1, and we want to decrement I minus equals k. We're decrementing I by k each time because we want to do that operation on the every kth element. So we're going to get the element at index I, and on this element we are going to add a dash. So how does that look? Well, let's console log our string over here and console log one more time. So here you can see that as string index I, we added a dash to this character, right? So we didn't add in a new element to our array. We just simply changed our character so that it has this extra dash at the end or after the character. So after this, now what we want to do is we just simply want to return our string. So to do that, we are going to return our string, but we want to combine it. So let's join. But there is one more thing that you have to consider. We have to convert all the characters into an uppercase. So let's convert it to an uppercase over here. And you can see that we have our final result. And let's uncomment this. You can see that we have our result too for the second example. Now let's go over our code one more time, and we're going to use our example 2 to do that. Now, first thing that we did was we replaced all instances of our dashes and converted our string into an array. So let's just console log that over here. And here you can see that we have our string without dashes. Now we are iterating through our array, starting from the end of the array. But a key thing is that we are subtracting our length by k. So our length is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 5 minus k is 3. And we subtract 1 is 2, right? So that's index 2. So that's this element over here. Well, we know that elements behind G, it already formed one group, right? So when we form a group, we want to add in a dash, right? So that's what we're doing over here. We add a dash where G is. Now, if you were to console log our string again, and then console log our I, you can see that the first I is at 2, which is where G is. And where G is, we add in a dash and we have G dash. So instead of putting it in the array, we just modify our character so that it's a lot more simple. But if we were to add, I don't know, at this index in the array, not in the character, we would have to somehow use a different method. For example, if you were to use splice, that would be more expensive work to do, right? Because we would have to reindex a lot of stuff. And if our given string was long enough, that would obviously take another O of N operation. But this one, we're just simply adding a dash to our character. So it's much more simple. And we do that again at index 0. And our index 0 is the first element. So we add in a under the dash and we are done iterating through our array. And finally, we just join everything and change each letter to uppercase and just return our result. If you guys find this helpful, make sure you guys like and subscribe. Thanks.